That badge came from a costume shop. Officer Travis Keller said it with a laugh, holding Deputy United States Marshal Elijah Grant's credentials as though the truth had already been decided. A light rain drifted across the shopping center parking lot in Arlington, Virginia, turning the pavement silver beneath the street lamps. Elijah stood beside an unmarked sedan in a dark jacket and plain clothes, his hands visible, his voice controlled, and his attention divided between Keller and the gray sport utility vehicle slowly moving toward the eastern exit. "Officer," Elijah said, "you have 30 seconds to decide whether your prejudice matters more than a federal operation." Keller's smile disappeared. "Do not threaten me." That was not a threat. It was a warning about the vehicle leaving behind you. Keller did not look. He examined the gold badge again, then glanced at Elijah's identification card. The seal was correct. The photograph matched. The title was printed clearly: Deputy United States Marshal. Yet Keller's eyes returned to Elijah's face with the suspicion of a man who trusted his assumptions more than official evidence. Less than 5 minutes earlier, Keller had arrived after a caller reported a black man watching cars near the rear parking area. Elijah had calmly explained that he was conducting federal business. He provided his badge, identification, verification number, and operational code. Keller rejected all four. "Real federal agents do not stand around parking lots dressed like this," he said. Elijah watched the gray vehicle reach the first turn. Inside it sat a fugitive connected to witness intimidation and the illegal transfer of protected evidence. For 2 hours, Elijah's team had maintained silent surveillance under Operation Silent Harbor. Federal units waited at 3 containment points within a 2-mile radius. No marked vehicles. No visible uniforms. No reason for the target to suspect anything. Until Keller arrived. Imagine spending months building a careful federal operation, only to watch one officer place his personal bias above every method of verification. Elijah's encrypted phone vibrated against the hood of the sedan. Keller picked it up before Elijah could reach it. A message glowed across the screen: primary target moving. Federal units inbound. Keller read the words and shook his head. "Nice performance." Elijah's voice lowered. "Put the phone down and call the number on my credentials. I am not calling anyone connected to a fake badge." Detective Lauren Mitchell pulled into the parking lot seconds later. She stepped from her vehicle, surveyed the scene, and immediately recognized the design of Elijah's credentials. "Travis," she said carefully, "that identification looks legitimate." Keller raised one hand. "Stay out of this." Lauren looked from Elijah to the departing gray vehicle. Something in his stillness unsettled her. He was not behaving like a man trying to escape questioning. He was behaving like a commander watching a plan collapse by the second. Elijah checked the time on the dashboard clock. 20 seconds, he said. Keller moved closer, attempting to reclaim control through volume. "You are not in charge here." Elijah met his eyes. "That is the second thing you have failed to verify." Far beyond the parking lot, an engine turned onto the service road. Then another. Lauren quietly copied the number from Elijah's badge and entered it into her phone. Keller continued speaking, unaware that the gray vehicle had reached the exit and unaware that federal units were already closing from 3 directions. The call connected. Lauren identified herself and gave Elijah's credential number. The voice on the other end paused only long enough to confirm the code. Then it said, "Keep everyone where they are. Deputy Marshal Grant is the field commander. Federal teams are arriving now." Lauren slowly lowered the phone. Keller noticed her expression but still did not understand. One pair of headlights appeared at the western entrance. Another turned in from the north. A third stopped behind the gray vehicle near the exit. Elijah looked toward the approaching cars, then back at Keller. "Your 30 seconds are over." The first unmarked vehicle stopped near the western entrance, followed by a second sedan from the north and a dark sport utility vehicle that settled behind the gray. Target car at the exit. Doors opened almost at once. Men and women in plain clothes stepped onto the rain-dark pavement, some wearing jackets marked United States Marshals, others carrying federal credentials where everyone could see them. They did not rush. They did not shout. Each person moved with the controlled precision of a team following a plan already established. Officer Travis Keller looked from one vehicle to the next, trying to understand why every new arrival seemed focused on the black man whose badge he had just called fake. Detective Lauren Mitchell still held her phone near her ear. The federal dispatcher had confirmed Elijah Grant's identity, his operational authority, and the existence of Operation Silent Harbor. She lowered the phone and spoke carefully. Travis, his credentials are valid. He is the field commander. Keller stared at her. You cannot confirm something like that from one call. Lauren looked at the number printed on Elijah's identification, then at the federal teams closing the parking lot exits. It was the official verification line. Elijah did not celebrate the confirmation. His attention remained on the gray vehicle near the eastern exit. The driver had stopped after seeing the federal car behind him, but the target was now alert. Months of preparation had narrowed to a few uncertain seconds. Elijah extended one hand toward Keller. Return my phone and credentials. Keller hesitated. His authority had not vanished, but it no longer controlled the scene. A woman in a navy raincoat approached from the western entrance, displaying her badge before she reached them. Supervisory Deputy United States Marshal Rebecca Hayes moved directly to Elijah. Deputy Marshal Grant, are you secure? She asked. The question traveled across the parking lot. Keller's expression changed. He had heard the title clearly. Elijah nodded once. I am secure. The target moved early after local interference. Activate the secondary containment plan. Rebecca turned and repeated the instruction into her radio. Federal units adjusted immediately. One team redirected traffic away from the eastern exit. Another approached the gray vehicle from a safe distance and instructed the driver to remain where he was. Shoppers near the storefronts were guided back inside without panic. The operation remained calm because Elijah remained calm. Imagine watching every person at the scene respond to the commands of the man you had dismissed only moments earlier. Keller looked down at the gold badge in his hand. It had not changed. The seal was the same. The number was the same. Only the number of witnesses had changed. There was a report of suspicious activity, he said, attempting to explain himself. Rebecca looked at Elijah's credentials, then at the encrypted phone Keller was still holding. Did he provide identification? Lauren answered before Keller could. Yes. He also provided a verification number and an operational code. Rebecca's gaze settled on Keller. Did you verify either one? Keller said nothing. Elijah stepped forward, his voice low and controlled. You were given the truth 4 times. You rejected the badge, the identification, the number, and the code. Keller finally returned the phone and credentials. Elijah checked the screen. The target had been contained at the secondary point, but another vehicle connected to the operation was moving beyond the parking lot. The delay had changed the entire mission. Rebecca noticed the alert. We can still recover it, she said. Elijah looked toward the rain-covered service road. Then let us finish the operation. He turned to Lauren. Detective, preserve your call record and every body camera recording from this scene. Keller's face tightened. He had expected the federal agents to leave once the badge was confirmed. Instead, they were preserving the exact moment he had chosen prejudice over verification. Elijah Grant returned his attention to Operation Silent Harbor while Rebecca Hayes coordinated the secondary containment teams. The gray target vehicle remained stopped near the eastern exit, but the second vehicle connected to the investigation had already turned onto the service road. Elijah studied the tracking display on his encrypted phone. Unit 3, maintain visual distance. Do not force movement. Guide the vehicle toward the south checkpoint. His voice was quiet, yet every federal agent on the channel responded immediately. Officer Travis Keller stood several feet away, rain gathering along the shoulders of his uniform, watching the scene reorganize around the man he had refused to believe. Detective Lauren Mitchell activated the evidence preservation function on her body camera and asked Keller to do the same. That is unnecessary, he said. Lauren looked at him. It became necessary when you rejected 4 methods of verification. Keller's expression tightened, but he could no longer order her away without creating another recorded decision. Elijah checked the operational map. The second vehicle carried a courier believed to possess digital records connected to witness intimidation. If the courier realized the primary target had been contained, the evidence could disappear before agents reached the next checkpoint. Keller's delay had placed the operation at risk, but Elijah refused to let frustration control the response. Rebecca, move the technical team to the southern route, he said. Michael Torres can intercept the courier at the toll entrance and confirm identity without exposing the larger operation. Rebecca relayed the instruction. Within seconds, Two federal vehicles left the parking lot in separate directions. The remaining agents maintained a secure perimeter around the gray vehicle while shoppers were guided away from the area. No one raised a weapon. No one created panic. The scene became more controlled with every decision Elijah made. Imagine seeing the man you called an imposter direct a federal operation with the calm precision of someone who had spent years carrying responsibility that could not afford ego. Keller looked toward the badge now clipped inside Elijah's jacket. "You could have identified yourself more clearly," he said. Elijah turned slowly. "I gave you my badge, my identification card, a federal verification number, and an operational code. You were dressed like a civilian. Federal authority does not become real only when it looks familiar to you." Lauren lowered her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the sentence. Keller tried another explanation. "The caller reported suspicious behavior." Elijah nodded. "A report justified questions. It did not justify refusing answers." Rebecca approached with an update. The primary target had complied with instructions and was being transferred for processing. The courier vehicle had reached the southern toll entrance, where Michael Torres and the technical team were waiting. The operation could still succeed. Elijah exhaled once, then asked for the local dispatch log. Lauren accessed it through her patrol computer. A coordination notice had been sent to Keller's department at the beginning of the shift. It advised local officers that a federal surveillance operation would occur within a 3-mile radius and provided a secure verification contact. Keller's unit had acknowledged receipt. Lauren looked at him. "Your department received the notice at 6:40 this morning." Keller stared at the screen. "I did not read every bulletin." Elijah's expression remained composed. "Then you arrived uninformed, rejected the information placed in front of you, and treated your assumption as evidence." The body camera recorded every word. Rebecca requested Keller's supervisor and the department's internal affairs liaison. Keller looked around at the federal vehicles, the preserved call records, and the agents waiting for Elijah's next instruction. His badge was still on his chest, but its power no longer protected the choices he had made. Elijah turned back toward the operation. A message appeared on his phone from Michael Torres. "Courier contained. Evidence secured. Silent Harbor complete." Elijah read it once, then looked toward the dark service road where the mission had nearly unraveled. The operation had survived. Keller's explanation would not. The message confirming that Operation Silent Harbor was complete should have ended the tension in the parking lot. But for Officer Travis Keller, it marked the beginning of a different kind of reckoning. Supervisory Deputy United States Marshal Rebecca Hayes requested that the scene remain preserved until Keller's supervisor arrived. Federal Agent Michael Torres returned from the southern toll entrance with a sealed evidence container and a written confirmation that the courier had been detained without incident. Elijah Grant reviewed the report, signed the transfer log, and handed it back without celebration. The operation had succeeded, but the delay had exposed a weakness no federal plan could ignore. Detective Lauren Mitchell stood beside her patrol vehicle, reviewing the department bulletin sent at 6:40 that morning. The notice was clear. Federal surveillance activity. 3-mile coordination zone. Secure contact number for verification. Keller's patrol unit had acknowledged receipt before the start of his shift. Captain Daniel Brooks arrived 10 minutes later, stepping from an unmarked command vehicle with the expression of a man who already knew the facts would be difficult. Keller moved toward him immediately. "Captain, I responded to a suspicious person call and followed procedure." Brooks looked past him at the federal vehicles, the preserved body camera footage, and Elijah standing beside Rebecca Hayes. Did the individual provide federal credentials? Keller hesitated. He provided something that appeared questionable. Lauren spoke before the silence could be rewritten. He provided a valid badge, identification card, verification number, and operational code. I confirmed all 4. Brooks turned back to Keller. "Did you call the federal contact listed in the morning bulletin?" "I had not reviewed the bulletin." The captain's face became still. "Then you arrived without the information your unit had already received." Keller attempted to explain that Elijah's clothing and behavior had raised concerns. Elijah listened without interruption. When Brooks finally approached him, he offered a formal apology on behalf of the department. Elijah accepted the acknowledgement, but not the idea that the incident could end with polite words. "The operation survived because my team had a secondary plan," he said. The next person your officer refuses to believe may not have federal units waiting nearby. Brooks looked toward Keller's body camera. The recording will be reviewed in full. Rebecca added that the United States Marshal Service would preserve its own communications, dispatch logs, and verification records. Every opportunity Keller had been given to correct himself would become part of the official file. Imagine realizing that the very devices meant to support your authority had captured the moment you allowed prejudice to replace judgment. Keller's confidence weakened as Brooks requested his badge and patrol credentials pending administrative review. "Captain, that is unnecessary," Keller said. Brooks held out his hand. "What is unnecessary is forcing a federal marshal to prove the same identity 4 times because you refuse to accept the answer." Keller slowly surrendered the items. The rain had nearly stopped, leaving the pavement bright beneath the parking lot lights. Elijah looked at the badge in Brooks's hand, then at his own federal credentials. Metal had never been the difference between them. One badge had been supported by discipline and responsibility. The other had been used to protect assumption. Lauren submitted her call record and body camera file to the evidence system. Before the federal team departed, she approached Elijah. "I should have intervened sooner," she said. Elijah met her eyes. "You intervened when it mattered. Now make sure the record does not forget why it was necessary." Across the lot, Keller stood beside his captain without authority, without an explanation that matched the evidence, and without the certainty that had carried his voice only 30 minutes earlier. Silent Harbor was over. The investigation into him had just begun. The administrative review began the following morning inside Captain Daniel Brooks's conference room, where every screen displayed a different piece of the same story. Officer Travis Keller sat beside a union representative, no longer wearing his badge or patrol credentials. Detective Lauren Mitchell occupied the opposite side of the table with a written statement, her verified call log, and a complete copy of her body camera recording. Representatives from Internal Affairs joined by secure video, while Rebecca Hayes, an illegal advisor from the United States Marshal Service, attended on behalf of the federal operation. Elijah Grant was not required to appear, but he chose to provide a recorded statement because he understood that the case could not depend on outrage alone. It had to depend on sequence, opportunity, and choice. The review began with the dispatch call. A citizen had reported a man watching vehicles in the rear parking area. Nothing in the call mentioned a weapon, a threat, or unlawful conduct. The caller had described only a black man standing beside an unmarked sedan. Captain Brooks paused the recording. "That call justified contact," he said. "It did not establish guilt." The next evidence came from Keller's body camera. Elijah appeared calm, kept his hands visible, and identified himself immediately. He presented a federal badge. Keller rejected it. He presented a matching identification card. Keller rejected that too. He offered the official verification number and mission code. Keller refused both. Then Lauren's body camera captured the moment she warned him that the credentials appeared legitimate. Keller ordered her to stay out of the interaction. The room remained quiet as each refusal entered the record. Imagine watching your own decisions return one after another, no longer protected by memory, status, or the confident tone used when they were made. Keller argued that federal badges could be copied and that false credentials were common enough to justify caution. The Internal Affairs investigator agreed that caution was reasonable, then asked the question Keller could not answer. "Why did you refuse the official verification process?" Keller looked toward his representative. The situation was moving quickly. Rebecca placed the federal timeline on the screen. More than 4 minutes had passed between Elijah's first request for verification and Lauren's successful call. Keller had time. He had information. He had choices. What he lacked was willingness. The review then turned to the departmental bulletin issued at 6:40 that morning. Keller's patrol account showed that he opened the message for 11 seconds before marking it read. The notice warned of federal activity within 3 miles of the shopping center and provided the same secure number Elijah later offered. Keller had not merely failed to read the bulletin. He had seen enough to know that coordination was possible and ignored it anyway. Brooks removed his glasses and looked across the table. "You told me you never reviewed this notice." Keller said nothing. Lauren then submitted 2 earlier complaints involving black motorists whose identification Keller had repeatedly questioned after dispatch confirmed their information. Both cases had been closed as communication disputes. Internal Affairs requested the complete files. The room changed again. The parking lot encounter was no longer standing alone. It had become part of a pattern. Elijah's recorded statement played last. His voice was measured. The badge proved my authority that night. But no citizen should need a federal badge before an officer decides that verification matters more than assumption. When the recording ended, Brooks placed Keller on formal administrative leave pending an independent misconduct investigation. Every prior complaint would be reopened. Keller had believed the arriving federal agents created his problem. The evidence showed that his problem had begun long before they arrived. The independent misconduct investigation expanded during the next 2 weeks, and each reopened complaint revealed another moment when Travis Keller had treated suspicion as proof. Internal Affairs interviewed motorists, store employees, dispatchers, and officers who had worked beside him. Some remembered details clearly. Others had tried for years to forget. One black college professor described being stopped after leaving an evening lecture because Keller claimed the rental car looked inconsistent with his appearance. Dispatch confirmed the vehicle within minutes. Yet Keller continued questioning him about where he lived and why he was driving through the neighborhood. A black nurse recalled showing identification 3 times while returning home from a late shift. Her complaint had been reduced to a misunderstanding about communication. A delivery driver said Keller accused him of using someone else's license even after the photograph, address, and company records matched. Each case had once seemed small enough to dismiss. Together, they formed a pattern too consistent to ignore. Detective Lauren Mitchell attended every interview she was authorized to observe. She had worked beside Keller for 4 years and had seen moments that made her uncomfortable, but she had accepted his explanations because challenging a colleague felt harder than believing him. Now the recordings forced her to confront what silence had protected. Imagine realizing that injustice does not survive only because one person abuses authority, but also because others decide discomfort is easier than intervention. Captain Daniel Brooks reviewed the reopened files with increasing frustration. Several supervisors had approved Keller's reports without comparing them to dispatch logs or body camera footage. In 2 cases, recordings had been automatically deleted after no formal preservation request was filed. The problem was no longer limited to one officer. It included a process designed to close complaints quickly rather than examine them honestly. Brooks ordered an audit of every bias-related complaint filed during the previous 5 years and requested outside oversight from the county inspector general. Rebecca Hayes provided the federal records from Operation Silent Harbor, including the verification call, Keller's refusal to use the secure number, and the departmental bulletin he had marked as red. Elijah Grant remained focused on his duties, but the parking lot encounter followed him into national attention after a bystander's short video appeared online. Reporters asked why he had stayed calm while Keller dismissed his badge. Elijah declined interviews until the investigation reached a formal stage. He did not want public anger to replace verified evidence. When he finally agreed to speak with investigators, his statement was simple. The greatest danger was not that he doubted me, Elijah said. The danger was that he refused every lawful method designed to correct that doubt. Keller's representative argued that the earlier complaints reflected the pressure of patrol work and that none had resulted in criminal charges. The lead investigator answered that misconduct did not become acceptable merely because it stopped short of prosecution. The question was whether Keller repeatedly applied different standards based on race, ignored verification, and misrepresented encounters afterward. The evidence pointed in one direction. Near the end of the 2nd week, Lauren discovered one final detail in an archived dispatch review. 3 years earlier, Keller had attended mandatory interagency training on federal credentials. The course specifically taught officers how to recognize United States Marshal's identification and use the secure verification system. He had passed the written examination with a score of 94%. Brooks placed the certificate beside the parking lot footage. Keller had not rejected Elijah's badge because he lacked training. He had rejected it despite knowing exactly how to verify it. The excuse of uncertainty disappeared. What remained was choice. The final disciplinary hearing took place 3 weeks after the parking lot encounter, inside a county government chamber where every statement would become part of the permanent public record. Travis Keller sat beside his representative at one table. Captain Daniel Brooks, Detective Lauren Mitchell, Internal Affairs investigators, and the county inspector general occupied the other side. Rebecca Hayes attended through a secure federal connection, while Elijah Grant sat quietly in the rear of the room. He had not come to demand punishment. He had come to make certain that the truth could not be reduced to another misunderstanding. The hearing officer began with the body camera footage. Keller's voice filled the chamber as he called Elijah's badge fake, refused the federal verification number, rejected the operational code, dismissed Lauren's warning, and ignored the coordination bulletin his department had already received. Then came the training certificate showing that Keller had completed federal credential recognition with a score of 94%. The room fell silent. He had known what the badge should look like. He had known how to verify it. He had simply decided that the black man holding it could not be trusted. Keller's representative argued that the parking lot was stressful and that officers sometimes made imperfect decisions under pressure. The hearing officer asked whether pressure explained 4 separate refusals to verify identity. No answer came. Lauren testified next. She described the moment she recognized the badge format and the way Keller ordered her to stay out of the encounter. He was not searching for the truth, she said. He was protecting the conclusion he had already reached. Captain Brooks presented the reopened complaints. The black professor, the nurse returning from work, the delivery driver whose documents had been questioned after dispatch confirmed them. Each story followed the same pattern. Suspicion came first. Verification came later. Fairness never came at all. Imagine watching years of private humiliation become a public record that can no longer be explained away. Keller finally asked to speak. He said he had never considered himself racist and insisted that his decisions were based on safety. Elijah listened without changing his expression. When invited to respond, he stood slowly. "This hearing is not about what Officer Keller calls himself," he said. "It is about what he repeatedly chose to do when black citizens gave him every fact required to correct his assumptions." He looked toward the review board. "The badge made my case impossible to ignore. The others did not have badges. That does not make what happened to them less important." The county inspector general issued the findings one by one. Keller had violated identification procedures, ignored interagency coordination requirements, made materially inaccurate statements, and demonstrated a sustained pattern of racially unequal enforcement. His employment was terminated. His law enforcement certification was referred for revocation. Every affected person would receive written notice that their complaint had been reopened and corrected. Keller lowered his head as the decision entered the record. No federal agents surrounded him this time. No one raised a voice. His career ended in a quiet room through evidence, testimony, and the choices he once believed no one would examine. Outside the chamber, reporters asked Elijah whether the ruling felt like justice. He paused before answering. "It is accountability," he said. "Justice will be what happens the next time an officer sees a black man holding authority and chooses verification before prejudice." The decision against Travis Keller did not erase what had happened, but it forced the department to confront every complaint it had once dismissed. During the following month, Captain Daniel Brooks established an independent review panel with representatives from Internal Affairs, the County Inspector General, Community Oversight, and Federal Liaison Offices. Detective Lauren Mitchell helped organize the evidence, matching body camera recordings with dispatch logs, written statements, and verification records. The work was slow because justice built carefully could not depend on speed alone. The black professor received a formal correction stating that his conduct had been lawful and cooperative. The nurse returning from her night shift was informed that Keller's report had contained unsupported claims. The delivery driver finally saw his original statement restored to the record. None of them celebrated. They had spent years carrying memories that the department had described as misunderstandings. Imagine being told that the truth you lived was finally believed only after someone with a federal badge experienced the same refusal. Elijah Grant understood why the apologies felt incomplete. He met privately with several of the affected citizens and listened without defending the system that had failed them. One man asked why it had taken a United States Marshal to make the department pay attention. Elijah answered honestly, "Because institutions often hear authority before they hear pain. That is what must change." Rebecca Hayes worked with Brooks to create a direct verification protocol for encounters involving federal personnel. Every patrol officer received access to a secure contact line, and every refusal to use that system would require written explanation. Brooks also ordered renewed training on racial bias, identification procedures, and interagency cooperation. But Elijah warned that training alone would not repair the culture. A policy tells an officer what to do, he said. Character decides whether the officer believes every person deserves that protection. Lauren requested permission to address the next department briefing. Standing before officers she had worked beside for years, she admitted that she should have challenged Keller sooner. I recognized the badge, she said. I also recognized that something was wrong before the federal call confirmed it. I waited because confronting a colleague felt uncomfortable. That hesitation became part of the problem. Her honesty changed the room more than a polished speech could have. Several officers later reported incidents they had previously dismissed as minor. The review panel expanded its work. Meanwhile, Keller appealed his termination, claiming the department had surrendered to public pressure. The appeal board reviewed the same evidence and upheld the decision. Weeks later, the state licensing authority suspended his certification pending permanent revocation. The ruling cited his refusal to verify lawful credentials, inaccurate statements, prior complaints, and failure to apply procedures equally. Elijah received the decision while preparing for another operation. He read it once, placed the letter aside, and returned to work. Rebecca asked whether he felt any satisfaction. Not satisfaction, he replied. Responsibility. He knew the story could easily become one powerful black marshal defeating one racist officer. But that was too simple. The deeper truth involved every citizen who had shown identification and still been treated as suspicious, every colleague who noticed unfairness and remained quiet, and every supervisor who closed a complaint because examining it would have required courage. Keller had lost his badge. The real test was whether the department had lost the habits that allowed him to misuse it. 3 months later, the county department gathered inside the same government chamber where Travis Keller's choices had entered the public record. But this time the room was not prepared for discipline. It was prepared for change. Captain Daniel Brooks stood beside Detective Lauren Mitchell, Supervisory Deputy United States Marshal Rebecca Hayes, and members of the independent review panel as the department introduced a new accountability policy built from the failures uncovered after Operation Silent Harbor. Every officer would now be required to document identity verification attempts, preserve recordings whenever credentials were disputed, and request supervisory review when personal assumptions conflicted with official records. Complaints involving unequal treatment would no longer be closed by the same chain of command responsible for the officer involved. Community representatives would receive quarterly reports showing what had been investigated, corrected, and still required attention. Elijah Grant sat near the back of the chamber, wearing a dark suit instead of operational clothing. He had declined every request to place his name on the policy. This cannot become a rule that matters only because a federal marshal was involved, he had told Brooks. It has to protect the person whose name will never reach the news. The professor, the nurse, and the delivery driver attended as invited guests. Their corrected records had been delivered, but the department also gave each of them the opportunity to speak. The nurse described how Keller's questions had followed her home long after the stop ended. The delivery driver explained that he had changed routes for months to avoid the area. The professor looked toward the officers seated in uniform and said, "The hardest part was not being questioned. It was realizing that every answer I gave became another reason not to believe me." No one interrupted him. Imagine a room once built to defend authority becoming a place where authority finally learned to listen. Lauren later took command of a new professional standards unit responsible for early intervention when complaints showed repeating patterns. She did not present herself as a hero. She reminded every officer under her supervision that courage often began before certainty arrived. Rebecca established joint training between federal and local agencies, using the parking lot encounter as an example of how verification, discipline, and respect could protect both public safety and constitutional dignity. The state licensing board eventually revoked Keller's law enforcement certification. The written decision did not focus on one insult or one evening. It cited the repeated refusal to follow procedure, the unequal treatment documented across years, and the inaccurate statements made after each event. Keller had once believed his badge allowed him to define reality. In the end, the record defined him. Elijah returned to the shopping center on a cold morning near the start of winter, not for a ceremony, but to meet Lauren before another interagency operation. The parking lot looked ordinary. Shoppers carried coffee. Cars moved beneath pale sunlight. Nothing marked the place where his identity had been denied. Lauren asked whether he ever thought about those 30 seconds. Elijah looked toward the eastern exit where the gray vehicle had once tried to leave. I think about the people who were never given 30 seconds to prove themselves, he said. Then he clipped his credentials inside his jacket and walked toward the waiting team. His badge had not become more real when federal vehicles arrived. His authority had not begun when others recognized it. The truth had been present from the first moment. Keller's downfall came because he believed truth required his permission, and justice arrived when the system finally learned that no badge should stand above it.